I'm telling them this story.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back with another episode of my Artstation challenge.
And I look at them and I say, "What? Is that not the reason?" And I can tell in that moment that
I
they all
am
know something and that they all
currently
know. And one of them looks up at me and says, "I'm not giving it to you because it's too expensive."
intending to
And my mind was blown. I was like,
fix,
what do you mean it's too expensive?
or at least resolve,
right?
some issues with this hand.
And so once it goes off patent, it'll be standard of care because
the top
great.
of the hand appears to be fine. I'm okay with that. I will definitely be doing some sculpting to give it a little more definition with the knuckles and possibly the inner bones of the hand. I'll make that look a little more defined since I have the vertices to play with. This underside, however, I need to mess with it a little bit more. It's not quite where it needs to be in the way of good edge flow. So this will be my mission in the immediate future. Once I have that figured out, sorted out, I'll be attaching the arm to the rest of the body, mirroring the body.
Is that opioids are dirt cheap because a bunch of them have been off patent.
I'll be attaching the arm to the torso here, doing a mirror function so that it will be symmetrical. Then, well, for the rest of my life. Well, actually, you know what? I don't even really have to mirror it yet. I could, from this, well, yeah, no, I'll mirror it. And then do some rudimentary UV mapping and prepping it for use in a sculpting program like Mudbox or ZBrush. Probably ZBrush.
Surely a bunch of other people.
So let me take a look at the hand here. We'll see how long it takes to sort out this particular geometric problem. And if we're lucky,
they're incredibly cheap. So morphine is, cents
we can
per dose, a couple cents per dose.
Move on here fairly quickly.
They are easy, right? You give them to the patient feels better immediately.
Right.
You give pills to a patient who comes in complaining.
I have a sketch that I worked on.
So this really led me to investigate this deep
that may be able to
perverse incentives
help me out here.
Just prescribing opioids instead of doing something more integrative and holistic.
All right.
You've had to go on opioids again after going through withdrawal because you had your sixth surgery after you had.
I do want
right?
to try
and then you had a tooth extracted, got an infection, and had a severe pain from that, and had to go back on opioids for that. But you handled it differently those times. What was different?
The biggest thing that was different before the sixth surgery was that I exploited my access. Finally, one of my very smart friends said, "Your faculty at Johns Hopkins, surely you can get better care than this if you just ask." And so I sent an email to a colleague in pain medicine who I didn't know very well, but I finally brought myself up to email him, gave a kind of 2-sentence summary of, "I'm really scared, I need help." And he said, "Of course, come talk to me." And basically by exploiting that access that I had only because I happened to be at Johns Hopkins, right, I then had access to world-class pain management, and they spent so much time with me, and a lot of what they did was just counsel me on what to expect.
Yeah, I don't quite want to go that route. That seems a bit messy.
Tissue damage.
So
if you take low-dose oxycodone or hydrocodone, so I ended up taking Percocet, if you take this absolutely only when needed and put up with a lot of pain, then you should be able to do it in very small amounts for less than 2 weeks. You probably won't have any withdrawal effects, although hard to predict. But there won't be a lot of struggle, but you're going to have to put up with more pain. And just having that kind of counseling and preparation and knowing how to weigh the cost of current pain against the future cost of, say, having to go through withdrawal if I become dependent, that helped me form a plan that I could stick to after the sixth surgery. And I should make clear, I wasn't then like magically able to just tough it out. It was horrible. It was excruciating. But I was more scared of withdrawal than I was of the pain. And I was able to stick to that plan of just taking very little opioids to get through the worst part, to be able to sleep a little bit. And I was able to recover without developing dependence again.
Well, I want to talk with you more about this, but first we have to take a short break. If you're just joining us,
probably better,
Reeder. He's the author
but
of the new book, In Pain, a
I want to
bioethicist
say
personal struggle with
not
opioids.
by much.
We'll be right back. This is Fresh Air.
I'm not really a fan of how that goes.
I'm Dominic Walker. Tonight on All Night Jazz, during our jazz trip at 10, we'll go into the breeze with this track from Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers featuring our Focus Artist of the Week, Lee Morgan. The adventure begins tonight at 9 on WUSF 89.7.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Creative Planning, whose fiduciary advisors look beyond age and risk tolerance to manage clients' investments. More at creativeplanning.com/NPR. Creative Planning, wealth management redefined. And from PBS with Chasing the Moon. American Experience brings the space age to television in a new 3-part series, a story of science, politics, and spectacle. Chasing the Moon, beginning tonight at 9, 8 Central on PBS.
This is Fresh Air, and if you're just joining us, my guest is Travis Reeder, author of the new book, In Pain, a bioethicist's personal struggle with opioids. He became dependent after he was in a motorcycle accident that shattered the bones in his feet. He nearly lost his foot, and he endured extreme pain from the accident and from the 6 subsequent surgeries. He uses his personal experience to explain some of the larger medical issues surrounding opioid use and dependency. You write that you've found an incoherence in modern pain medicine. So what do you mean by incoherence? Do you mean like conflicting approaches?
I do mean something of conflicting approaches. Basically, pain is suspicious. It's suspicious because it's inherently subjective. So you can't know what my pain is like. I can't know what yours is like. And our doctors can never know exactly what our pain is like. And that combined with the fact that you can get a prescription for a highly addictive, sought-after drug by reporting pain kind of forms a bubble of suspicion around pain medicine. And pain patients will tell you this, right? They'll tell you that they deal with stigma and suspicion a lot. And so because of that unknowing, right, we've just swung back and forth like crazy between, well, these drugs are too dangerous, so we shouldn't give them to anybody. Or once we start to get comfortable with them for whatever reason, we just give them out like candy, which is a little too close to what we've done for, a couple of decades. The incoherence that I point to is that I think right now we're kind of mid-swing. Starting in the 90s, we went towards really aggressive prescribing. And now, because of the opioid crisis, we're trying to slam that pendulum back. And if you talk to pain patients, they'll say, we already have, right? They're experiencing the stigma of doctors not wanting to give these medications out at all and treating them as, scare quotes, drug seekers. And so the pendulum has started to swing back. But that doesn't mean that we're sitting in the middle in some kind of nuanced way where we're using the medication well. Instead, it means that doctors are just doing all different things. Some of them are aggressively prescribing, some of them are withholding drugs because they think everybody's a drug seeker, and very few of them have the training to actually use them in a responsible, evidence-based way.
And then there's the issue of chronic pain and how, if at all, opioids should be used for chronic, back pain or knee pain or hip pain. Where are the conflicts there?
The conflicts there basically come from the fact that we never had great evidence that opioids would be a good therapy for really long-term chronic pain, but we used it anyway. And so even if opioids make you feel better in the short term, the worry is if you eventually get to the point where you require opioids to live your life, then you're going to get stuck on this kind of merry-go-round where you have to keep escalating the dose to keep the pain under control. And the therapeutic window, this ability to actually get benefit from the medication, will get smaller and smaller. So that's part of the worry, that we just don't think that these drugs will be great for a lot of patients.
So this spring, the CDC issued a clarification on its guidelines regarding chronic pain, saying patients shouldn't be suddenly taken off opioids or given a fast taper when they've been on opioids for chronic pain. So am I to interpret that as like a lot of doctors are saying, oh, you've been on the opioids for too long, so just stop, or, giving them a regimen to taper really suddenly, which would lead to withdrawal?
I think that's exactly the right interpretation. And so that's what the evidence accumulating somewhat anecdotally is. So basically, in 2016, the CDC came out with these guidelines for opioid therapy in chronic pain. And that's when they said, this should not be first-line treatment. But they made a couple of points, and one of the points they made is you should really try hard not to escalate dosage above 90 morphine milligram equivalents. So we translate everything into morphine for standardization. So you should try really hard not to go past 90, escalating the dose. There was a lot of kind of ham-fisted, unnuanced policy reaction that said, look, the CDC now says that nobody should be on 90 morphine milligram equivalents or above. And so if you're on a high dose, we're going to taper you down to that point or below. And then also kind of the fear of being an opioid prescriber in an era where we're becoming more scared of these drugs have also just led physicians to start saying, I don't want to be prescribing high doses. The DEA is going to be knocking on my door, so I'm going to taper you down. But there have been these other sorts of initiatives where physicians will actually receive letters from the DEA saying things like, we noticed that you prescribe a higher volume of opioids. And just the existence of that sort of noticing can have a real chilling effect, right? If you're a physician and you're like, my livelihood and my ability to not be prosecuted, right, depends on not appearing suspicious, maybe it's not worth it for me to continue prescriptions. And that physician might take care of a lot of patients with cancer or with sickle cell, these really profoundly painful conditions that require opioids in higher doses for longer periods of time. But people looking at raw numbers of prescriptions don't have that sort of nuance. So we certainly want the DEA to be able to identify pill mills, but we don't want there to be a kind of chilling effect on legitimate physicians who are trying to treat patients compassionately.
I'd like you to explain where you think underground drugs, heroin, and underground sales of opioids connect with the medical issues that you've been talking about.
This is a really interesting story because we talk about the opioid epidemic as if it's this singular phenomenon. But what I argue in the book is that there are actually multiple opioid epidemics, right? Because a lot of folks will tell you, I live in this city, I live in that city. Heroin's been around for a really long time, right? This is not a new epidemic for me where I live. And they're right about that. There are lots of places in the country where there has been heroin causing a lot of damage for a very long time. Now, starting in the late 90s, you get this kickoff of the prescription opioid crisis. And from 1999 to 2010, prescriptions of opioids quadrupled. And at the exact same time, overdose deaths from prescription opioids quadrupled. So it's a perfect trend line match. And that was a devastating kickoff of today's drug overdose crisis. The thing is, we've already started to squeeze the supply of prescription opioids because we have, as a country, become very concerned about this crisis. And so we started telling doctors, hey, stop killing your patients. And so prescribing peaked between 2010 and 2012, but that didn't solve the opioid crisis because it was never going to solve the opioid crisis, right? Because if people have an addiction, their health condition is defined by this behavioral component where they will seek this reward even in the face of negative consequences. So if you take away their legitimate supply, some number of people who have an addiction will go where they can find the drug, which in this case is the black market. So at the same time that we squeeze the supply of prescription opioids, overdose deaths from heroin shot up. And within a few years, we get so much heroin and so much demand for heroin in the country that you have this sort of incentive to make heroin even more profitable, easier to transport, easier to sell. And so you want it more potent, basically. And this is where fentanyl, synthetic fentanyl, and its analogs like carfentanil come into play. And so the heroin today is just shot through with these really potent synthetic drugs. And that is what's killing the majority of people dying from the opioid epidemic today, not prescription opioids. So this is a really complicated story where prescription opioids kicked off what's happening, but solving the prescription problem absolutely will not solve the broader drug overdose crisis.
Let's take a short break here because there's plenty more to talk about. If you're just joining us, my guest is Travis Reeder. He's the author of the new book, In Pain, a bioethicist's personal struggle with opioids. We'll be right back. This is Fresh Air.
This is WUSF 89.7. Next time on Q, Feist. She is one of Canada's biggest indie songwriters. Her sound has really evolved over the years, and so has her latest album, Pleasure. It began as a record, then she turned it into a cookbook, and now it's inspired her to start a storytelling podcast called Pleasure Studies, which touches on personal stuff people struggle with, like suffering panic attacks or living as an undocumented immigrant. Feist stops by to show you a different side of her and a whole different sound. That's coming up on Q tonight at 8 o'clock, right after Fresh Air here on WUSF. You can join us on Sketches of Spain, a trip that highlights the art, the culture, and the food in two of the most romantic cities in the world. With private tours through Madrid and Barcelona, you'll experience extraordinary excursions and must-see locations. The trip is almost sold out. Visit wusf.org/Spain to reserve your place. This is your NPR station, WUSF.
This is Fresh Air, and if you're just joining us, my guest is Travis Reeder, author of the new book, In Pain, a bioethicist's personal struggle with opioids. He became dependent after he was in a motorcycle accident that shattered the bones in one foot. He nearly lost the foot, and he had to endure 6 surgeries, so he was in a lot of pain. He uses his personal experience with opioids to explain some of the larger medical and bioethical issues surrounding opioid use. He's a research scholar and the director of the Master of Bioethics degree program at the Johns Hopkins Berman Institute of Bioethics. You've been talking about how the medical opioid crisis has led to an expansion of the underground drug crisis because a lot of people who are cut off from their medical supply of opioids end up on heroin or buying opioids on the underground market, buying pill form synthetics on the underground market. But we treat those two types of categories really differently. If you're getting medical opioids, then you're a medical issue.
As you can see,
if you're lucky, you'll have doctors consulting
this
you
is
on how to taper.
quickly becoming a mess.
Underground,
a bigger and bigger mess. However,
criminal issue. So you're put in jail for it, in prison.
This is
you have to go to a drug clinic.
While I'm messing things up, I'm also simplifying things in a way. I'm trying to find a way to make this more and more efficient. A model. Like there's got to be a different way to connect these things in a way that
such an important issue
is
haunted me, to be honest, when I started working
that isn't
on this
quite so
because I have
complicated or
the harm from opioids to me was what folks call iatrogenic, right? It was caused by my medical care, and there's this very sympathetic story out in popular culture of this person who has an injury and goes in the hospital and then kind of unwittingly develops a dependence or an addiction and then becomes a statistic in this overdose crisis. And that's a very sympathetic story. The problem is there's this other story that's been happening for a long time where somebody develops an addiction to heroin, and we don't listen to whatever reasons they might have had for taking heroin. We don't care very much because they're a criminal, because heroin is a crime. Doing heroin is a crime. So when they become a statistic, we don't care as much. And so I would get this question a lot early in my research. Why are we talking about the opioid crisis so much today? And the implied answer is, well, because a bunch of white people started dying when it hit rural America and then suburban America, and eventually powerful politicians started having people that they knew become victims in this crisis. And so the reason that racial component comes up is because the heroin crisis prior to the 1990s was found largely in cities, and it disproportionately affected members of the minority community. today's epidemic, or at least what sparked today's epidemic with prescription opioid crisis, are disproportionately white. They get this really sympathetic telling of their story when there have been people of color dying from heroin disproportionately for a really long time, and we just didn't talk about it and we treated them like criminals. That's a travesty. It's absolutely tragic. It's a stain on our response to drugs in this country. People take drugs for reason, and whether you started with oxycodone or with heroin, if you were medicating something and it hurt you and you ended up, dying from overdose, your life matters. And we need to just kind of announce that loudly every time we have this conversation.
One of the things you looked at was how military medicine handles pain. And understandably, the military has to deal with a lot of pain patients. So what are some of the things you learned by looking at the military?
Boy, this was interesting. Yeah, so I got introduced to a couple of these military docs through a friend of a friend. I went to this organization called DV-SIPM, which is an integrative pain medicine group for Uniformed Services University. And these guys are doing wild stuff. So one of the first things that they told me is that they go around training Army physicians to use acupuncture. And I was like, oh, well, that's kind of wild. I didn't know that acupuncture was taken, that seriously, that the military would be into it. And then they're like, yeah, no, we use acupuncture on the battlefield.
On the battlefield?
On the battlefield,
wow.
Yeah. So they're training people with these ultra-mobile, sterile packs of what's called auricular acupuncture. So that auricular meaning going in the ear. So they're having folks, like, if you get injured on the battlefield, your medic, has the shot of morphine. They're prepared with that. They have whatever triage kit that they have, but they also have this little pack with, I think it's 5 sterile little gold needles that they then inject into your ear. And the data they have on this is really pretty shocking. I mean, they tell stories about people for whom the acupuncture is so effective that they end up either using very little or even no opioids, for some stretch of their treatment. That's kind of the most surprising thing that I learned. But they've also done a lot of work on using nerve blocks. So trying to turn a nerve off, essentially, to your leg or to your arms. They have these mangled limb injuries, body armor covers the torso, but you have arms and legs sticking out. So they have a lot of these mangled limb injuries. So they try to turn the nerves off to a mangled limb, and then they don't have to use any opioids. And this is really important, because if you're trying to fly somebody back from Iraq or Afghanistan and they have to get all the way back to Walter Reed, how many hours are they going to be completely sedated with morphine before they get back? And that really starts a train leaving the station that is pretty hard to control. So now they have patients who come back with a nerve block who don't need any morphine for the flight. So they're doing really incredible things. And a big part of it was because as the military, they deal with more pain. And so they had this, decade where they had to figure out, how in the world are we going to treat our soldiers without having a huge proportion of them coming out struggling with opioid use disorder, which is what they were facing. And so they're really focused on developing state-of-the-art opioid-sparing treatments, and they're doing incredible work.
So I'd like to know if you're still in pain in the foot that was crushed in the motorcycle accident.
Oh, varying degrees, depending on the day. I given what I've been through, I don't even think about it very much. I rock climb now, which is
oh no, you're kidding me.
No, I do. I don't like rock climb outside and stuff. I'm pretty risk averse these days. But I do indoor rock climbing, and I have to do it a little bit goofy because one of my feet doesn't work very well.
Oh.
But I found things to kind of help me exercise and fill the kind of void that was in my life, because I was a little self-pitying for a while. My foot doesn't work and it hurts all the time. Okay. But I found ways to work around that, and so I try to live some of the values that I found in my research, where your attitude can help a lot with your pain. You avoid catastrophizing. You try to think about what you can do. You try to work in the ways that you can. And who knows if it's placebo or not, because it's what my research tells me. But I feel like I've gained a lot in the years since I've been really trying to do those things.
There's a lot to be said for the placebo effect.
That's right. I'm a big fan of the placebo effect.
Too. Travis Reeder, thank you so much for talking with us. This was great.
All right,
thank
I'm going to see if I can't.
It's been a real thrill to chat with you.
Sort of replicate
Travis Reeder is the
this.
author of In Pain. He's a research scholar and the director of the
on the
Master
flip side,
of Bioethics degree program at the Johns Hopkins Berman Institute of Bioethics. Tomorrow on Fresh Air, we'll talk about last month's Supreme Court decisions on gerrymandering and the census citizenship question, and what the next steps might be with the citizenship question. My guest will be Ari Berman, who covers voting rights for Mother Jones. The census and partisan gerrymandering will help determine the political map of the 2020s and which party is in control of the state houses and Congress. I hope you'll join us. Fresh Air's executive producer is Danny Miller. Our technical director is Audrey Bentham. Our engineer today is Charlie Kyer. Our associate producer of digital media is Molly C.V. Nesper. Roberta Shorrock directs the show. I'm Terry Gross.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Home Instead Senior Care, committed to helping seniors stay in their own home, offering personalized in-home services, including personal care, meals and nutrition, and memory care. Learn more at homeinstead.com/NPR. And from Subaru, committed to doing its part to make the world a better place by supporting philanthropic initiatives in local communities. Learn more at Subaru.com/lovepromise. Love, it's what makes a Subaru a Subaru.
Fuck Subaru.
This is WUSF 89.7 Tampa, St. Petersburg, Sarasota. We are broadcasting from the University of South Florida. I'm Tyler Klein. Glad to be with you on this Monday. Stay with us. Q is coming up next, and Q is sponsored in part by the Open Network, a season of community conversations where you can shape content around universal themes such as civility and future city. More at learnopen.org. Around town tomorrow, St. Pete's Imagine Museum is doing private group tours for just $5 per person for the month of July. Doors open at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Land of Delight Natural Farm will host an organic farmers market with farm animals. That's tomorrow morning at 10:30 in Plant City. And the Tampa Tarpons host the Dunedin Blue Jays at Steinbrenner Field tomorrow evening at 6:30. You can find out about more things happening in our community by logging onto our website, WUSF.org.
So, new USF President Stephen Carell, do you have any major changes in the works?
I don't feel the need to make some kind of early statement. My job is to help the USF community make the right decisions for the university in the long run.
I'm Mark Schreiner. Here part 2 of my interview with the new top bull on the next University Beat. Wednesday at 7:45 a.m. and again at 5:44 p.m. Hi, I'm Elijah Wood.
Hi, I'm Margot Timmons of Cowboy Junkies.
What's up, y'all? This is Mike D.
This is Ad Rock.
And you're listening to Q.
And you're listening to Q
with Tom Power.
When you go through something really hard, whether it's a loss or a death or a sickness, sometimes just talking to someone who's felt the way that you're feeling will make you feel a lot better. The great Canadian musician Feist has a new podcast that's sort of about just that, connections, empathy, and when you're going through something tough, not going through it alone. She'll tell you about it in just a couple of seconds. Plus, did you know the original title of War and Peace is War, What Is It Good For? These facts were presented to you by the show Seinfeld, which is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. Our Q Screen panel talks the legacy of the show and yada, yada, yada. All that and more coming up on Q.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Louise Schiavone. University researchers have discovered that federal immigration officials searching for undocumented immigrants have in the past sought driver's license photos for possible facial recognition matches. But as NPR's Arthi Shahani reports, the effort ran into privacy laws in at least one state.
Georgetown Center on Privacy and Technology obtained government documents revealing that ICE asked at least 3 states to help search for suspected undocumented immigrants: Utah, Vermont, and Washington. This was between 2015 and 2017. The documents indicate Utah and Vermont responded, not just giving ICE the file on specific requests, but also taking pictures ICE provided of individual immigrants and finding matches for those photos in driver's license databases. Washington state declined to assist, saying the federal agency had to get a court order first. ICE requests by themselves were not enough to override state privacy laws. Arfi Shahani, NPR News.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is reviewing the role of human rights in U.S. foreign policy, and as NPR's Michelle Kellerman reports, that has some activists worried.
Secretary Pompeo says human rights claims have proliferated over the years, and he wants to go back to the basics. He's named his Harvard mentor, Mary Ann Glendon, to chair what he's calling the Commission on Unalienable Rights. The Democratic chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Eliot Engel, says this commission risks undermining many international human rights norms, including LGBT rights. He also says it makes an end run around a State Department bureau dedicated to human rights. Engel says in a statement that's why the House recently passed a measure to prohibit funding for what he calls this bizarre effort. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, the State Department.
The House of Representatives next week votes on a bill to raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2024. A new study by the Congressional Budget Office sheds some light on potential results. NPR's Alina Selyuk has more.
The new research by the nonpartisan CBO analyzed what might happen if the federal minimum wage went up by year 2025 to $15 an hour, roughly double the current minimum of $7.25, which hasn't changed in a decade. The CBO says this increase would mean job losses for 1.3 million workers. That's a median estimate. The CBO wrote that it's hard to exactly predict how employers would react, but overall estimated that there could be between about 0 and triple that many jobs lost. At the same time, the study says the $15 minimum wage would boost pay for 17 million people who'd otherwise earn less and lift 1.3 million Americans out of poverty. Alina Selyuk, NPR News, Washington.
The Dow today closed down 115 points. The Nasdaq was off 63. This is NPR. Scientists say lead pollution in the Arctic has decreased by about 80% since the 1970s. NPR's Rebecca Hersher reports that's thanks to sweeping environmental policies like the Clean Air Act.
Arctic ice collects whatever pollution is in the air, creating layers and layers of pollution history. Scientists took ice cores from Greenland and eastern Russia and tested for lead in layers going back to 200 BCE. They were able to show how, from the early Middle Ages through the 1970s, the amount of lead pollution in the air increased hundreds of times as lead and silver mining expanded, with little dips along the way for major wars, famines, and especially plagues. The research was published today in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The researchers also found that air pollution regulations in the 1970s cut back dramatically on the amount of lead pollution. However, there's still about 60 times more lead making its way into Arctic ice today than there was before the Industrial Revolution. Rebecca Hersher, NPR News.
Mexico says creating jobs and improving the environment will do more to stop illegal immigration than any amount of border enforcement, and it's investing in that goal. Today, Mexico announced it will extend a reforestation program to Honduras. Officials will finalize the deal later this month. A similar plan to plant fruit and lumber trees is already being implemented in southern Mexico. The government is also planning to increase funding to create jobs in Central America and stem migration from the region. I'm Louise Schiavone, NPR News, Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include MD Anderson Cancer Center, where physicians treat all types of cancers with a team of nearly 21,000, all devoted to ending cancer and providing hope to patients. More at makingcancerhistory.com.
I'm Jackie Leiden, host and correspondent for NPR. One magical day, I opened the door to the Chicago Bureau, and the world opened to me. From Cobble to Kentucky, from subterranean New York to the catacombs of Paris to Nashville's backstreet women, NPR opens a door on a world that becomes as familiar as your front porch. This is NPR.
And this is your NPR station, WUSF 89.7. Glad to have you with us on this Monday. Coming up tonight on All Night Jazz, the other 9 to 5, Dominic Walker is Gone with the Wind on the Jazz Trip at 10 with The Breeze and I from Art Blakey's Jazz Messengers, featuring Focus Artist of the Week, trumpeter Lee Morgan. And then later on our Midnight Standard, we'll hear...
It's kind of hard to... You know what? Let's do this. Let's do it side by side.
The pitch begins tonight at 9, right after 2 here on WUSF. Check out our program schedule online at WUSF.org.
You are listening to Q on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169, and from Public Radio International, which goes by PRI. I'm Tom Howard.
Alright. I shall attempt to do a side-by-side comparison.
What you're hearing right now is the title track from her latest album, Pleasure. It came out in 2017. But then it kind of kept coming out. All these different things. First, her fans answered her call to throw listening parties where they'd get together and talk about the songs. Then it inspired a vegetarian cookbook. It's all the recipes Feist made while she was making the record.
Okay,
and now, once again, Pleasure is evolving into something more than music.
I'm Leslie Feist, and welcome to Pleasure Studies, a song-by-song look at the themes underpinning our lives.
That's right, Feist is launching a podcast called Pleasure Studies. It's a storytelling show, and as I mentioned, Feist is here. Hi.
Hi.
So, what made you want to get into the world of podcasting?
Yeah, I guess I grew up with, I mean, this isn't a CBC name drop, but I grew up with the radio on the kitchen counter. You know, it was always a voice coming off the kitchen counter. And then radio kind of went away, I guess. It was just not, like, I guess I wasn't in a kitchen as much or something.
Yeah.
But then podcasts showed up, and they were really keeping me company on the road. Like, I discovered On Being. You ever listen to that Krista Tippett one?
No.
It's an NPR one, and Radio Lab is phenomenal.
Incredible.
Right?
Yeah.
And I just started to get beguiled again by it. It's so disarming. Listening, just you're alone, you're listening to these ideas, there's new stuff coming at you, and your mind is putting it together, and your imagination is triggered, and
Incredibly intimate, too.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah, I'm never surprised. So sometimes when I go out, people will say, hey to me, like I'm their uncle or their brother or
Best
something like
friend,
that.
yeah.
Because I think it is. It's a one-on-one sort of intimate thing, podcast.
Well, it leaves a lot to your imagination. It's sort of like reading. You have to come up with your own, if you love a book, you don't necessarily want to watch the movie of it, because then your characters will get usurped by the ones on the screen,
Yeah, I felt that way a couple of times.
Yeah.
So can you tell me about this questionnaire you sent out after Pleasure came out?
Yeah.
That's not quite where I want to go with that.
Having done this a few times, just make a record and then go out and tour it. And there's that step between those two where you go talk about it, and with journalists or with anyone who's curious about the record. And that's not the easiest part, because often I'm a little close to the record still. I'm not exactly on top of what I was writing about. It's hard to just nutshell it, So I kind of had this idea, this sort of sneaky back way, that if I was to write this questionnaire out, which was sort of written on the tenets of the things that I was curious about when I was writing the record, and then give it to the journalists before we did the interview, it would cue their mind up, pun intended.
Hey, get out of here. Come on. She's still got it, ladies and gentlemen. She can't care about
money more now. Yeah, it would sort of key their mind up to a line of inquiry that was more in keeping with what I wanted to be talking about, which wasn't my subjective story. It was, I'd written about that, and I didn't really have it, it wasn't really something I was like really comfortable talking about yet. So I thought that if I could just sort of play with the idea of deeper thematic kind of tectonic plates underneath the songs, and that are in everyone's lives, including the journalists' lives. And anyway, the joke was a couple of the first journalists were really responded well to it, and a couple were like violated. Like, what is this? I don't want to answer these questions. Like,
you wanted them to answer them.
Yeah, and I also said I wasn't going to read them. It's about exercising that muscle inside yourself to answer questions. Which actually, it's funny. Before I came this morning, I had never answered the questionnaire myself, and I thought I should refamiliarize myself with what it was. And it was really interesting because I think the idea I had at the time was you have a week full of experiences, and half of them are fantastic or bolstering, and half of them are really, somehow disorienting, or they irk you, or you just don't feel comfortable with them. And then at the end of your week, you're mostly you're like ticker taping off the ones that were bad. So you're sort of like, you're, reinforcing the negative at the end of every week, and the questionnaire kind of was exercise the muscle to lean positive.
Could you give me
That's pretty much it.
What were some of the questions? Even just one or two.
It was like, one is describe the best memory that hasn't yet happened to you. So you're basically being asked to, conjure up something aspirational, something you really want, and then talk about it as if it already happened. That's kind of just sort of a play on magic, you know. You just manifest something, envision it, and then it could happen.
Yeah.
You can't get anything that you don't already know you want.
Yeah. But there's something very revealing about that, you know. Like what we were talking about that on Friday. What was the question we were asking in our office on Friday? What would you do if you knew you were never going to fail?
Right.
We were having that conversation in our office the other day, and it got a little deep.
Right. I mean, that's sort of the key. I mean, that's kind of why I called the record Pleasure. It was a game with myself. I had not been experiencing much of that. At the time, I was going through mostly the sort of like hair dryers of life blowing at me, sort of, you know, like a wind tunnel of I was just quite lost at the time when I was writing that record, really confused and disoriented by like life shifting around me. And then I thought, well, why don't I just, instead of dwelling on that, which is, I see the
things
that
are already
what if I just call it the opposite? I'll call it pleasure. And maybe I'll manifest some of that.
Maybe what's it called? Fake it till you make it. Yeah. Isn't that the thing? Hold on, this questionnaire you sent out to people though.
Oh, so then So after the journalists, I realized they're in a job that would maybe preclude them from being easygoing about that. But it was because they're the askers, right? And but then we just folded it out into the ether, and it was I think I wrote a letter to people to, explaining, hey, if you want to take a minute to answer this, I don't really know what I'm looking for. But if you're interested to just cue your mind this direction, then maybe, you can, like, it was for their 5 minutes. It was just for them to have that 5 minutes where they lean positive. That was the exercise.
What were some responses you got that surprised you?
Well, I think the main thing was there was so many, and also they were all, I saw a through line that everybody is really working hard to deal. Everyone's leaning negative. Everyone's judging themselves. And this was also not culturally about us up over here in our 1%y North American life. It was all people from all over the world, and there was a through line of self-doubt and shame, lots of hidden secrets. There was one of the questions is describe a secret that doesn't need to be one anymore. It's sort of like lift the veil off of something that you're keeping a secret.
But Leslie, like, I know that, and I don't want you to talk about this stuff, but like, I know you were going through something really hard when you were making the Pleasure record. And I was trying to allude to this a little bit earlier. Was this sort of about getting like an empathy through shared experience? Like you were going through something tough, and I hear that people are going through tough. Maybe my burden isn't as heavy.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. When I was in the thick of it writing, I was looking around for resources, anyone else who had left little crumbs in the forest, some sort of map to get me through. Other people who had been in a similar place. So I was reading a lot. I was listening to Krista Tippett a lot, which is a lot of people talking about their interior lives on her podcast. And I started to see that, wow, when people talk about what's going on, on the flip side, on the inside, unguardedly, then there's a lot of clues. I came up with a word which you'll love, I hope. Accumulation.
Hello. Accumulation?
Yeah, you're accumulating clues. That's what I was.
Oh, that's nice, actually.
It's pretty cute.
Yeah.
Right? I love that stuff.
Yeah.
That's what makes my world go round, actually, is puns like that. But anyway, I was accumulating these clues, and I was doing it through looking for how other people had navigated their way through a difficult time. And then reading these questionnaires, everyone was so generous, mainly because they knew that it would never be exposed to the light of day. This was very private. A lot of people did it anonymously. And I just thought what they did was spend 5 minutes leaning positive. And it's a hard work to lean positive because there's a lot of these details of our subjectivity really becomes this sort of closed climate ecosystem. We're in like a diving bell of our own version of reality. And in there, you can kind of have impunity to justify whatever you're feeling and whatever tendency towards negativity or just feeling overwrought or overrun. And then all of a sudden you see everyone else is going through the same thing.
And I think that's what you hear like when you go through this podcast, because I think, you take some of the themes in the survey, you take some of this commonality, you turn them into the podcast. I want to play a little bit of it.
why work so hard if I couldn't see myself on the podium and someone announcing me as the Olympic champion?
When I was pursuing my dream, I felt exhilarated, excited, and intoxicated.
I felt like the most electric, vibrant, creative version of myself.
You're listening to Q. I'm Tom Power. That's a clip from the first episode of Pleasure Studies, a new podcast from Feist After Day. Can you tell us, what did we just hear?
Yeah, those are... each episode is 3 or 4 people telling their own stories about a particular journey in their lives, a particular era. And this one... And each episode sort of touches on different themes. So this one is about loss and, you know, perseverance, how you manage to stand up again. And that's an Olympic hurdler named Perdita Felician, who tripped after she was a world champion, sort of like aiming for the gold, and she tripped at her first hurdle.
Oh my.
You know, so that's sort of... We kind of did the thing where we were like, well, what's an ultimate dream to lose? Robbie Lackertz and I, who's also executive produced with me, we were, you know, like, what's a real loss? We thought, well, an Olympic medalist, where, you know, like that's about as your whole life has been pointed at one thing.
That's a defined loss as much as you can get,
Yeah. And Dylan Evans is a guy in England who started an intentional community that kind of dissolved around him over many years, and that was, you know, a real utopian ideal that was lost. And then Sarah Brooke Curtis is a woman who lost her child a few days after the child was born, and those are 3 very singular stories, but somehow when you weave them together, you kind of braid them together. The editing is super intuitive and experimental. It's not like, here's my story beginning, middle, end, and here's the next story beginning, middle, end. They shed light on one another.
I think that's what I was surprised by, because I guess the way I'm used to listening to things was that, we would hear the story of the medalist, and then we would hear the story of the parent who lost her child, and then we would hear the story, you know, all in one and one. But there's something about braiding them together, right? There's something about, as you say, braiding them together that gives a real, again, commonality of experience, you know?
It kind of, no matter what the details of what's going on for you, if you're touching on the same bedrock, I mean... That's the thing. I was feeling very tied to and what's the word? Like, I was feeling really dedicated to the details of my life. And that's something about that you eventually wear yourself out on. You're like, the details matter much less than the place I'm living the details from.
Well, what do you mean you were kind of burnt out on the details of your life?
Well, I mean, at some point when you've lived long enough. Hello. You start to repeat yourself enough that you're like, oh, I'm back here again. And someone once said to me, you can go around and around in circles. I mean, and I did for many years. Or eventually you can sort of work to make that circle into a spiral. So you're still spinning, but you're at a different altitude every time you come back around. Yeah. And you can kind of ascend your way out with these new clues, you know? So that's the getting sick of yourself. Well, then it becomes an extra interesting secondary life you can live, where you're wondering how you're conducting yourself in any moment, no matter the details. Like, from where are you acting, you know? And so when you take 3 stories and you shed light on each other, you know, there's something to be shown that despite the details, there's still like big things, small things, they can all, you know, pull you towards some sort of greater ideal. I don't know. It's a pretty hopeful podcast, you know.
I would say so. Did it work? Did it make you personally feel something different collecting these stories?
Absolutely. It totally did. It was sort of a way to make the questionnaire tangible, because I really wanted to respect people's privacy when they were answering that. I wasn't going to lift those stories out. But there was something where I got this bird's eye view on this tendency towards self-doubt that I thought, why don't we just go around the world and find some people that can illustrate these points. And it's basically just a resource to lean positive or to lean towards hope. Because, you know, none of these people are in the thick of their stories. They're all on the other side. So they have some information on how you get to the other side.
And again, it worked for you. Like, you felt something different.
I did. And also, I mean, I always joke that writing songs and touring is kind of like a GPS for the soul or something. You're one place and you get to another by writing about it. You make it be past tense. You sing about it as past tense. And then it somehow becomes past tense through the repetition on tour. So I gained distance from my own stuff and perspective, and then this podcast series was a pretty useful tool. It's sort of like being in a subway car when it's just putting thought bubbles out above everyone's heads. You think you're alone on that subway car, but if you were to just sort of get a look at what was going on in everyone's minds, you would have a lot more in common than you think, which I think is a pretty useful thing in this hyper-isolated way we live our lives, you know?
But if I love what you said there was songwriting performing as a GPS for the soul. But I feel like your soul is nourished through some of these stories that you're hearing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these commonalities, and you know, I remember in my life moments where I felt so alone and I felt a lot lost. Just again sitting down and having a beer with someone who was going through something that I was going through, or had in the past gone through something I was going through, changed me, right?
Sorry.
Please go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, friendship is sort of like you're messed up on Thursday, and your friend really walks you through it and has empathy for you, and then they're really messed up on Saturday, and then there's an equality there. You know, there's it's not a one-way street. We kind of have to understand that we're the trusted one, and therefore we can trust, you know, the other person.
I guess the point where I wanted to make was that if the last record was, and this is me being really reductive, but like if the last record was you were going through something so hard and you kind of imposed pleasure on it, as we talked about, it's sort of a manifestation of feeling good. You know, given that you're hearing these stories of that will legitimately get you through a hard time, you know, that will legitimately lift your spirit, that will, as you mentioned, legitimately give you hope. I have to ask, is that impacting the music you're making now, these stories?
I'm pretty sure it will. I haven't really begun writing again, but I know that it'll be from a different perspective than it was. I'm a little bit less curious about combing through the same territory of me and my feelings. You know, I'm more curious about our common feelings. You know.
You feeling any more at peace in your day-to-day life?
I am. Thanks for asking. For sure. Yeah, like, you know, you just get some distance from things, and hopefully when you come out the other end, you're not just sort of stumbling. I like came out the other end with, you know, it's that all the cliches are true, that you get forged by the fire, you know. I'm definitely more resourced up to figure out whatever is to come next, undoubtedly will come next, you know.
I can't wait. Nice to see you.
Thank you so much. You too.
Feist has a new podcast. It's called Pleasure Studies, and it's out today. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, it's the show about nothing and its legacy. Or do we need to talk about its legacy at all? We talk the 30th anniversary of Seinfeld with John Semley and Emily Nussbaum after this.
Still futzing about with this hand, as you can see. But,
And good evening, I'm Tyler Klein.
Making
this is
some progress.
WUSF 89.7, your NPR station. You know, supporting WUSF benefits everyone in our community. If you'd like to learn how to include WUSF in your will or estate plan, visit us online at wusf.org/gift planning or call 800-741-9090.
The murder of a minister in Alabama remained unsolved for more than 50 years.
Cases don't grow cold because they're easily solved. They grow cold because they're hard to solve.
But last month, using the FBI's own files, NPR's White Lies podcast revealed it had identified a new suspect. So why did the Bureau never share those files with local authorities? On the next morning edition from NPR News.
You can join us for Morning Edition tomorrow morning from 5 to 9 right here on WUSF 89.7. Julie Marquez of Spectrum Bay News 9 says mostly cloudy overnight tonight with scattered showers and thunderstorms. Lows will be in the mid to upper 70s. There's a chance of tropical development in the Gulf over the next few days, and regardless of what happens with that, whether or not it becomes a depression, we will stay wet for the next few days with rain chances between 60 and 70%. And for the latest news on the tropics, just visit WUSFnews.org. This is WUSF.
You're listening to Q on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169, and from PRI, Public Radio International, I'm Tom Power. Hey, remember Seinfeld? The show about nothing turns 30 years old this month.
What's the premise?
Well, as I was saying, I would play myself, and as a comedian living in New York, and I have a friend and a neighbor and an ex-girlfriend, which is all true.
Yeah, but nothing happens on the show. It's just like life. You know, you eat, you go shopping, you read, you eat, you read, you go shopping, you read. You read on the show?
Well, I don't know about the reading. We didn't discuss the reading.
So back when TV audiences first met Jerry Seinfeld, George Costanza, Elaine Benes, and Cosmo Kramer, TV was a very different experience than what it is now. The 80s had given us all these sort of wholesome family sitcoms. Every episode ended with strings in the background and a good moral lesson. So those four were a pretty shocking departure from all that. Today, we've gathered our Q Screen panel to explore how Seinfeld changed over 30 years and what it changed for television. And you'll get some recommendations for your summer watching pleasure if you'd like to be terrified as part of your summer holidays. John Semley is a TV and movie critic. He's here in studio. Hi, John.
Hello, Tom.
Was that your Seinfeld?
No, I was just startled by you greeting me, and I responded as if I was shocked.
Okay.
Keeping with the horror theme.
Okay, good. And I'm so happy we have a very special guest on the show today, a TV critic for The New Yorker, also the author of a collection called I Like to Watch. We had her on the show just the other day. Nice to have her back. Emily Nussbaum joins us from New York. Hi, Emily.
Hey, great to be here.
Nice to have you back. Emily, I'm going to start with you. Walk us through what the TV landscape looked like when Seinfeld first came out. Well, what set this thing apart?
Well, first of all, Larry David, who co-created Seinfeld with Jerry Seinfeld, had a line that he used to describe the show at the time. They repeated all the time where they said, "There's no hugging or learning." And that itself was kind of the exciting thing about the show, was that it wasn't trying to warm you up and make you go awe. It was sort of a cold, nihilistic, sharp comedy with a great kind of cerebral tone to the way the jokes were made. You didn't have to love the people.
Did it work? Was it a big hit right away?
It was not a big hit right away. I mean, I think this is true of a lot of shows that are breakthrough shows, is they have to teach people to watch them, and it basically all depends on whether a show can stay on the air for long enough for people to get into it. But people were enthusiastic after a while. It's just the first few episodes were kind of a slow burn.
John, were you a fan?
They said that about Ulysses, I think, that it teaches you how to read it. So, yeah, I was a big Seinfeld fan when I was a lad. To whisk you into my past, I would come home from hockey on Thursday nights, and the family would gather around the old idiot box and watch Seinfeld and Frasier back to back. I was in middle school at the time. It was a huge part of my life. You'd come to school on Friday, people would be saying the catchphrases. One person showed up to class to eat a candy bar with a knife and fork, like the episode the evening before. So yeah, and it has basically been
all this is getting kind of crazy.
You still watch it, right?
I do. I've always said that nothing makes a house feel like a home, like having an episode of Seinfeld on in the background while you're, doing dishes or the laundry or something like that. And yeah, it's on all the streaming services and stuff. So once in a while, I'll put on a favorite episode.
It's a very strange model of a home.
Yeah, I just want to have four people bickering in the background when I go about my affairs.
And as you braise, you want people arguing about socks or something like that.
Exactly.
Listen, we could spend hours dissecting the legacy of Seinfeld, but often when we have these big anniversaries, these big pop culture touchstones, the natural question, the first question I had was how does it hold up by today's standards? But Emily, is that even a fair question? Should we be judging TV in its past by today's standards?
Well, first of all, to me, it's not standard so much as it's seeing it in the context of the period. I don't have a strong sense that today's standards are intrinsically better than past standards. The thing is, when the show came out, it was such a tremendous tonic to people. It was exciting because it was new and it was strange. And we're living in a time where the legacy of Seinfeld is everywhere. And there are plenty of cold, nihilistic, sharply written comedies on TV, and so when you watch it now, it doesn't seem like something new. You see this everywhere, like on shows like You're the Worst and BoJack and Curb. But actually, it's funny. You called it the idiot box, which is definitely how people thought of TV at the time. And I think the biggest change has been the fact that the show wearing its smartness on its shoulder, like just constantly presenting itself as this cerebral comedy, was itself a new thing for TV. I don't think people think of TV in quite the same way. So TV has changed as much as our view of Seinfeld.
Yeah, I think that there's, again, this show about nothing idea, I think kind of undersells it. I mean, there's such a rich narrative architecture to Seinfeld, the way the plot lines kind of fold into each other. Again, it's something we're used to if we watch Curb Your Enthusiasm or something like that. But as far as the standards of the day, I know that there's certain issues that have come up. They took the Puerto Rican Day Parade episode out of circulation in some markets. The Cigar Store Indian episode maybe does not hold up as well. But I think that there's a smartness and a quality to Seinfeld that does hold up. And I think that, you know, as Emily said, maybe the standards of today are no different or no better or worse than the standards of the 90s. But yeah, you have to judge it in that context. Certainly things can be racist and awful and problematic in their own historical context. But for me, Seinfeld passes the sniff test.
Well, to me, it's actually about the TV on network at the time was incredibly white. And there were black sitcoms, and they were essentially on other networks like UPN, and they were eventually gentrified off the air. So in that way, Seinfeld was actually representative of what was going on. I definitely do think that when you look back on it, it's such a specific portrait of white people on the Upper West Side in that period. And it's fascinating to me that they took out that episode, because it's true, when you watch it, you just cringe. Yeah. And even though it was a cringe comedy, it's just a different kind of cringe.
If you're just tuning in, today we're speaking with John Semley and our special guest, Emily Nussbaum, a Q screen panel. Let's talk a little about something that doesn't have any hugging or learning, definitely. You brought some recommendations for summer horror. And John, I have to tell you, when I think about the summertime, I don't necessarily think about horror.
Why not?
I don't know. It's kind of a dark fall thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so, but I don't know. It's fun. Like, I see horror movies as being fun a lot of the time, you know? And summer is fun. It's like, summer for me is like watching old slasher movies and like listening to Metallica and riding a bike around. Like, that's like the 14-year-old stuck in amber image of summertime.
Emily, I feel like we're getting a weird glimpse into John's life where Seinfeld is playing in the background.
This is like, so it's bicycles, horror, Metallica, and Seinfeld. Are they the four food groups?
Those are my four. Yeah, they constitute my personality. That's my Myers-Briggs archetype.
I'm with you on the summer horror, though.
Really, Emily? You can watch horror in the summertime?
Yeah, it's like a drive-in thing. It's the kind of. I mean, I like. There are certain kinds of art that give you a physical sensation, you know, comedy, porn, and horror. So basically, like, things that get you out of control and shake you up, like horror, I think are great for the summer because it's a visceral thing.
So let's start with John's summer horror. Well, not maybe necessarily pick, but a movie that's getting a lot of attention this summer. What is Midsummer?
Yeah, Midsummer is this new film by a filmmaker named Ari Aster, who had a big hit last summer with Hereditary. And Midsummer is interesting as a summer horror movie because it's set in Sweden during the summer solstice, which makes it one of the rare horror films where most of the horrific things transpire in broad daylight, which I think poses an interesting challenge for the movie. Now, to say I recommend Midsummer after giving it a withering review in the paper of record, I don't know if I can do, but I think it makes an interesting film to see that has kind of a bright milieu. It's very kind of well and thoughtfully and excruciatingly made. And I think that, yeah, it might be maybe not a date movie, considering the way in which it traces the collapse of a gendered relationship over 2+ hours. But yeah, certainly a fun kind of drive-in movie.
I think it's a great date movie.
That's true. It's like it's a metric, a barometer for your partner if you get through it together.
Emily, I remember we got to speak to Ari Aster when Hereditary came out. I just remember being quite, you know, I think I had a panic attack in the middle of the movie theater. Like, it was so incredibly terrifying. Did you enjoy Midsummer?
Actually, I like your description of writing a withering review. I would not have written a withering review, but I found it beautiful and well made, but largely empty. I didn't regret seeing it, though, and I actually think seeing horror movies on a date is a great idea because then you get shaken up, and if you don't like the movie, you get to argue about it in a pleasurable way afterwards. So that's my idea of a good date. But yeah, I have to say, I thought it was gorgeously made, but when I thought about it afterwards, it didn't leave that much of a residue, and this was in contrast to some other horror movies that I've seen recently, like Us, Jordan Peele's movie, which I saw and I thought, oh, that's beautifully made, but it didn't leave that much. And then I kept thinking about it for days and days, and afterwards I thought it was really a rich experience. So that's just the difference. Something gorgeous but empty.
So there is something exciting you about horror right now. Like, it is a good time for horror right now.
Well, I don't have an expertise on horror, but yeah, I mean, the horror movies that I've seen recently that have gotten a lot of acclaim, Jordan Peele's film Get Out, which obviously everybody responded to greatly, but also Us, which I thought was really powerful. The hard thing is a lot of these films are actually puzzle films, so to talk about what works and doesn't work about them requires spoiling them. So it's a strange catch-22 where you have to recommend that somebody see something flawed just so that you can talk about it with them.
So we were just talking about Midsummer, sort of John's pick for discussion anyway. Emily, you wrote a piece in The New Yorker recently about a new horror series on HBO called Los Espooky?
Los Espookies.
Los Espookies. Well, what is this show?
Well, it's great. It was made by Fred Armisen with Julio Torres and Ana Fabrega. And it's, first of all, it's partially in Spanish, partially in English with subtitles for each of them. It's set in Latin America, and it's essentially about this almost Seinfeld-like group of friends who are all crazed horror enthusiasts, and they form this organization called Los Spookies to do all sorts of events to, like, fake a haunted house and things like that. They're hired by different clients. But the thing about the show is that it's not really about that. It just has such a wonderful mixture of
something going on here.
And also genuine
I'm not really a fan of it, like, at all.
Genre. It's about people who really love something other people think of as junk, but they're bonded by their adoration for it. It's also beautiful. It's as beautiful in a lot of ways as Midsummer, but I actually got a lot more out of it.
It's funny because we were talking about Seinfeld off the top, and it makes me think about that era of TV. And we were asking, Seinfeld is still present now.
I'm going to save this out as a different version.
What does it tell you about TV now?
Open up my original.
Los El Spookies can exist.
And see whether or not I like the original better. I might
to Death, which was an earlier
like the original
show
better.
That was on HBO. That was
because
also
this is just
about a group
mess.
of friends that shared a love for what some people think of as a low genre. In that case, sort of Chandler-like detective novels and things like that. I don't know that it says anything specifically about television, but it definitely says something about the way that shows can attach themselves to a different genre and celebrate it in a way that gives the show itself a structure.
If I can manage to
simultaneously loving the show and loving
clean this up
paying homage to
in a way that makes a little more sense, I will not hesitate to just go with this one because I do think this is a much cleaner.
Which is like which is that.
All right, so let me see what I can do with this.
But now there's more of an HBO-fication of horror.
Yeah, I mean, so I have thoughts on that. I think it's like more of a marketing thing or some sort of fatuous, self-flattering designation for people who aren't into horror movies to say like, oh, this is above the baseness of genre. I mean, I always think about the Halloween sort of reboot that came out last year, and there was all this talk in the media about like, oh, it's about trauma. It's about how people deal with trauma. It's like, yes, that's what the original Halloween movie was about. I mean, I think that we have this sort of compulsion these days to think that in order to have the license to enjoy something, it has to be about something, for lack of a better word. And we see this sort of anxiety around genre films all the time. I mean, ultimately, I think what matters is the film and the filmmakers themselves. And they can often elevate things by virtue of their talents or not elevate them by lack thereof. But yeah, I think that we should be allowed to enjoy genre without some sort of embarrassment or without having to bogusly intellectualize it. Because as Emily said with Midsummer, and I tend to agree, sometimes that sort of elevated element doesn't work. And if you were to just say, here's a fun movie where people get their faces smashed in beautiful clothes, it would be a more satisfying pitch because it delivers on that promise.
Emily, what do you think? Does a horror film need to have some sort of social commentary right now?
First of all, I agree with everything that you just said about the false categories of elevated horror and schlock horror. Those aren't the categories. The categories are whether things are good or bad, whether they're enjoyable or not enjoyable, whether they, have some kind of lasting feel to them. But I'd also say almost the opposite of what you said, which is that it's true that it's kind of a BS thing that you have to look at something and find some fancy schmancy thematic reason why it's okay to watch. But I also would say that even the schlockiest horror has always been social commentary to some degree. I mean, it's all is about something. It's about how horrifying it is to be in a body, how vulnerable bodies are in death. And, even vampire things are some kind of social commentary because they are metaphors for aristocrats draining the population. So whether you actually experience them that way or not, it's not as though there's some category where things are meaningful and some category where things are meaningless. But I do think that horror is powerful because it's visceral. And so whether it's good or bad, it works if it affects you. That's the judgment I'd make.
Yeah, I think to tie back to something like Lost of Spookies, I mean, I think that subtext, what used to be subtext, is now sort of being foregrounded as the text. Whether you're saying Night of the Living Dead is a parable for the civil rights violence in America, whether you're saying, as Emily said, I think referencing Franco Moretti on Dracula, that Dracula is a capitalist bourgeois sucking the blood from the working class. Those used to be a kind of like currency that fans would kind of trade amongst themselves, a secret language or something like that. And now I think that language is kind of being foregrounded in a way that I don't know, makes me uncomfortable. Maybe it's just because I have a fanboyish itch and everyone else is in on it, and I feel a need to sort of be possessive or something.
That's how I feel about all those Grateful Dead shirts going around these days.
Tell me about it.
Emily, before we go, and John, the summer means we might have a little bit more time on our hands. Maybe we can tuck into a new show we've been putting off. Emily, since you're here, I mean, I gotta ask you, what do you recommend this summer?
Actually, this is an odd recommendation because it's not a new show, it's an older show, but the new season of Orange is the New Black is coming out, and it's the final season of the show, and I know that many people who are fans of the show actually lost faith in it a little bit in the last 2 seasons. I saw the new season, and I think it's wonderful. It's not perfect. The show has never been perfect, but that's not its appeal. And it also, it is about powerful current political things. It's about... it has a strong plot that's about the immigration crisis in the detention centers, and I found it very meaningful. So that's something that I would recommend.
John, how about you?
I call an audible and say, in the summer, you should go fly a kite, go to the beach, read a book. Speaking of genre, I got the new James Elroy book. But if I have to recommend a TV show...
You do. That's literally all I asked you to do.
Damn your hide. Big Little Lies is my summer trash show that I love to watch.
You like that show?
I love it. I don't know. It's so fun, and I hate that awful Mary Louise. Every week I tune in to see what she's scheming and plotting, and it's fun for me. I don't know.
It's so strange because I love the first season of that show. The second season's not working for me for exactly the reasons you love it. Like, I'm not watching the show as a mud pit thing. I love the first season because I thought it had all of these sort of beautiful things to say. But it definitely has a fantastic cast. So
yeah, season 2 is like the Saturday morning cartoon version of season 1, which maybe I respond to more.
Guys, thanks a lot for coming in. John Semley is TV and movie critic. Thank you, John.
Good to be here, always.
And the TV critic for The New Yorker, her new book is called I Like to Watch. Emily Nussbaum, always nice to have you on the program. I hope you'll come back.
I'd love to. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Coming up next on the show, you're going to hear one of my favorite moments of the year. And I knew Dan Aykroyd was coming in, legendary Canadian actor, comedian. And I knew that he is a blues brother and he likes to perform and sing a few blues songs. I didn't know that he would come in before we even said hello, point at my guitar and say, "Come on." But you're about to hear what happened when he did just that. Dan Aykroyd coming up right after this on Q.
So, new USF President Stephen Carell, do you have any major changes in the works?
I don't feel the need to make some kind of early statement. My job is to help the USF community make the right decisions for the university in the long run.
I'm Mark Schreiner. Here part 2 of my interview with the new Top Bowl on the next University Beat. Wednesday at 7:45 a.m. and again at 5:44 p.m.
I'm Dominic Walker, and tonight on All Night Jazz, during our jazz trip at 10, we'll go into the breeze with this track from Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers featuring our focus artist of the week, Lee Morgan. The adventure begins tonight at 9 on WUSF 89.7.
You're listening to Q on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169, and from PRI, or Public Radio International. My name is Tom Power. Welcome back to the program. Beldar Conehead, Elwood Blues, Ghostbuster Ray Stantz, Ray the Auto Parts King Zelensky. Those are some of the characters Dan Aykroyd has brought into your life over the years. Dan is an actor. He's also one of the original cast members of Saturday Night Live. Dan's career has stretched out for decades, and you're about to hear the kind of Canadian part of Dan's career. But speaking of being a showman and an entertainer, when Dan Aykroyd came in, he walked in. I never met the man before in my life. He said, "Tom Power." I said, "Hi, Dan." And he said, "Oh, yeah, that guitar there, that in tune?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, let's do something." And right off the bat, seconds after meeting this man, this is what happened.
Doing key of E. Oh, A, key of E. Well, I always start with a verse, Here we go. I'm going down to Louisiana. Give me a mojo hand. Some power, ladies and gentlemen. Going down to Louisiana. Give me a mojo men, put them under my command. Hey, I got my mojo working. I got my mojo working.
Got my mojo working.
I got my brrr.
Got my mojo working.
I got my
Got my mojo working.
I got my mojo working. Just won't work on you. Oh, we're done. I mean, come on. Oh, we're on our way, man. I mean, doesn't it feel good? Doesn't it? When I do the show, you know, Jimmy Belushi, John's brother, we still do the Blues Brothers. He's Brothers Z, I'm Elwood, and we go out there and we still do it, you know. It's the 1.5 hour of my life I don't have to think about anything else.
Yeah.
But the music.
It comes from somewhere else, hey?
It feels good.
It bypasses the cortex or something like that. You know?
No doubt about it, man. Gets the endorphins going.
Do you want to play something? Let's listen to this.
Now when I get the blues, get me rockin' Now when I get the blues, get me rockin' chill. If the blues overtake me, I'm gonna rock right away from you.
Wow. So that's Flip Flop and Fly, Dan Shaw Blues Band. First came together in 1969, 50 years ago. My guest Dan Aykroyd knows a thing or two about these guys, right?
They're beautiful. We're going to be playing together on the 22nd of June at the Jazz Fest here, and just so excited about being able to come and pay tribute to a band that had an incredible influence on my work and career. You know, Johnny Belushi and I were in the 505 Queen Street Club, you know, drinking a few illicit beers, and we were listening to Downchild, and he hadn't really heard him before. He'd come up to recruit for Second City. For not Lampoon, you know, from Second City, and he listened to the Downchild. What's this? Oh, that's Downchild, you know, blues band. Oh yeah, I said, Johnny, you're from Chicago, you know all about the blues. Well, I'm into heavy metal. I'm into Led Zeppelin. I'm into Grand Funk. I'm into, you know. So, you know, I introduced him to the blues. By the time we got back to New York to start SNL, he had 300 records there, and we with Paul Schaefer researched what we were going to put on the first record, and we did 2 Downchild songs.
Right.
Yeah.
So
and then, yeah.
When was the idea then to put the Blues Brothers together?
It was there. It was that night that we saw. Yeah. And Howard Shore was there, the famous music scorer, and he said, "You guys should put a band together and call it the Blues Brothers." And we went, and then now here, 40-some years later, I still do it. We have 13 nightclubs that were based on the concept. 2 movies out there, 10 records, and just, you know, and then kind of everybody around the world. It's an iconic thing that people see, those 2 line drawings of the boys. It's kind of like General Electric or Harley, or, you know, there's an iconic, people tattoo them. You know, it's yeah.
You weren't like, I got to think that, man. So you were up there with Duck Dunn, Steve Cropper. No intimidation about that up there with your heroes?
Well, the thing was that we would have had no Blues Brothers if it weren't for Steve and Duck. They legitimized us. They came, they said, well, these guys, you know, they aren't the greatest vocalists or singers or musicians, but they're good frontmen, and they're funny. They're like Winoni Harris or Cab Calloway. They have that old feel of frontmen, and they can go out in front of a band and make people laugh and acquit themselves okay to the music and in a way that it works. And they said, and they're paying tribute. They're paying tribute to the veterans. And so Steve and Duck knew we were paying respect to the old music, and that's why they came on board.
And you guys used to do the SNL after parties too, right?
Well, all kinds of people came to those parties. Yeah, they'd end at 10 in the morning with me pulling the armor over the windows, and, you know, and the limousines leaving, and I'd once sort of stumble home, and then the next week would begin.
I feel like
we're golden times.
I feel like I'm talking to like a musician who reluctantly has to act.
Well, you know, it was with Blues Brothers. We sort of had to, as actors, we had to kind of, well, you're you know, you're going to play a musician now, so you have to learn something about music, and so we took vocal lessons, we danced, took harmonica lessons, and danced, and dancing lessons, and that. And we applied, you know, our disciplines and skills as actors to it, I think. Yeah.
Want to do this? Take a listen.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen from Kingston, Ontario, Canada, home of Kirk Muller, Walter Frank High, and me, it is my honor to introduce to America my friends, the Tragically Hip.
That's my guest Dan Aykroyd introducing the Tragically Hip. for the classic 1995 performance of Saturday Night Live. Isn't that beautiful?
You see how excited the audience was, just even they didn't let me speak there, because they knew who the Hip was. They were so excited and anticipating that. Yeah, it was just beautiful.
So can you tell me about bringing the Hip to SNL? Like, I've heard a lot of rumors and stories about it that you were responsible for bringing it.
Yes, I did. I lobbied Lauren heavily to do it, and although they didn't have much of a presence in terms of airplay down in the United States, they had a live presence. They played a lot of bars, a lot of clubs. Every Canadian would come out and see them, and they were selling records, some records in the States, but I wanted to get them more exposure, and I think I helped.
I think you did too.
But it would have been nice to have had Gord come back and visit that show again. Yeah,
it would have been all right.
Yeah.
I miss him now. He's gone a couple of years now.
Yeah, all the time.
Do you remember seeing the Hip in Kingston? Like, would you go home and?
Yeah, well, they played at RMC in the backside of the hill. One beautiful night there. I remember one summer night, and then they came back for a charity, and I saw them then. Yeah. I saw them twice in Kingston play. Yeah. A great guitar band, incredible backbone drummer, and a real poet, and I might say an intellectual at the helm of the writing and lyrics and thrust of the band. It was fun to see him in a stadium setting. It really was.
Yeah. Listen, while I got you, we don't got you forever. Can I ask you about something I've been meaning to ask you about?
Tell me now.
Go ahead.
Pippin, I saw it.
It's right here, right?
Don't move. It won't hurt you. What happened? Are you okay?
He slimed me.
That's great. Actual physical contact.
If you're just joining us, this is Q. I'm Tom Power. It's a clip from the original Ghostbusters film. The person getting slimed in that scene was Ghostbuster Peter Venkman, played by Bill Murray. The guy who seemed jealous, it wasn't him, is my guest, Dan Aykroyd, who played Ghostbuster Ray Stantz. I love that you laughed during that. I love that even after all these years, you still find that funny.
Oh, that's great. That holds up that picture. And Billy's amazing, the greatest romantic comedy leading man in history.
He was in here not that long ago, too, with his cello group.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
What a positive act that is, man. What a beautiful show that is. We need that. It's just lovely that. That's something we need in this world today, absolutely. And we also need to toast National Caesar Day, the 50th.
We're getting to this, and I hear what you're doing. We're getting to the Caesars. I see
You're
the
talking about celebrations and stuff.
We're doing the Caesars. We're not going to end with...
Well, I know, but we could go on and talk about a lot of things.
This fits into everything, man. Because the question I was going to ask you about Ghostbusters wasn't about Ghostbusters. It was about this. So, like, your dad wrote a well-regarded book on the history of ghosts. Your grandfather was a telephone engineer who explored the idea of contacting the dead via radio technology. Your great-grandfather was a spiritualist himself. You said ghosts are pretty much your family business. You're here talking about ufologists on the show. Like, what got you guys going on the supernatural? Do you have any idea?
Well, my great-grandfather was a dentist in Kingston, and at the turn of the century, from the 1840s right to the turn of the century, America, there was a search for a new religion. So some religions had failed in upstate New York. Protestantism had gone through there, and Mormonism, and people were looking for something to believe in. And so you had the Fox sisters from Hydesville, New York, produce a spirit. And they communicated with this spirit, and it rapped, and it moved tables, and they finally did an excavation in the basement of the little cabin in Hydesville, New York, and found a body and identified it as somebody who had been murdered and buried in the basement. So my grandfather was kind of the investigator in Kingston. If the Fox sisters came through town with their act, or a medium, or a seer, or a psychic, or a precipitated painter, that's where the painter sits about 5 feet away from a canvas, wiggles his or her fingers, and an image appears on the canvas without any visible paint. He was the guy who would bust the hoax. He would say, no, that one's not genuine, or that's a genuine medium, and he kept journals of all his experiences. So this is like, my great-grandfather, then his son was a Bell telephone engineer, and then my dad passed it on to me, and
then you do Ghostbusters.
All right, I did it based upon their research, all lying around the house instead of in the summer. The summer cottage. It wasn't National Geographic or Life magazines. It was the American Psychical Research Journal, or Fate magazine. So I was reading all of these, and I basically read an article about quantum physics and parapsychology in the old farmhouse one afternoon, and went, I'm going to do old-style ghost comedy like Bowery Boys, Abbott and Costello, and I'm going to marry all of the technology and all of the vernacular and all of the research that's really been done in the paranormal world to that comedy concept, and that's basically where the idea came
came from.
So, like, as technology has grown, we've been debunking things left, right, and center. Has your belief in the supernatural ever really been challenged in a substantive way?
Well, I've gone to places where they've told me that they're quite active presences and nothing's been appeared. But no, the supernatural, the invisible world, the paranormal are very much at work in our world.
Yeah.
And very much now, you see media is dependent a lot on this content. And so we're celebrating 35th anniversary of Ghostbusters coming up. And then the 50th anniversary of the Caesar on the 17th of May.
Come on, let's go into it. For God's sake. Well, you love the Caesar, eh?
Well, I just, it's a distinctly Canadian thing. And it's funny how in the States nobody knows about it.
You call it a Bloody Mary.
It was
the same thing.
It was invented by a guy named Walter Chell in Alberta. And he had the vongole sauce pasta as an inspiration. There was clam juice in there. So the only way to make a Caesar is with Mott's Clamato, and then they've married up with the famous Newfoundland product, the Crystal Head. There's the little skull there. And what's great about making...
I feel like I'm on The Price is Right.
Yeah, well, I'll buy it from you.
Yeah, right.
The skull has this beautiful clean fluid in it. That's why the Mott's Clamato mixes so well in a Caesar, because there's no additive in Crystal Head. It's just that beautiful aquifer water from Newfoundland, peaches and cream corn from Chatham, Ontario, and no glycerin, no terpenes, no sugar. So, if you're a bartender or a bar chef at home, you want to make a drink, you're adding all kinds of stuff anyway. Why not start with the blank canvas, and that's Crystal Head.
That's not a bad pitch.
Johnny, I'm on with Tom Power on cue. Say hello. Johnny Fay on the line here. How are you? You're on the air right now.
We just played the clip from SNL.
Oh, that was so much fun. So much fun. All right.
Talk to you soon. All right, bye.
Listen, we got to run. Dan, before we go, so speaking of Frank Schuster, I got this question for you here now. So we're talking about the ingredients that go into making a Caesar, which are?
Of course, a really clean vodka. Mott's Clamato is necessary. Mott's Clamato rimmer. They make some great rimmers. Worcestershire sauce, and then usually a celery stick or some kind of food in there. You stir that around.
So here's the big CBC closer. Yeah. Speaking of ingredients going into a Caesar, give me the 3 influential people that go into making Dan Aykroyd.
Oh, that's easy. My dad, Peter, my mom, Lorraine, and my brother, Peter Jr. We battled through, years and decades together, formed each other's characters. My brother was also supportive of my comedy and vice versa. And my dad said, just go out, go follow your dream. And my dad and mom supported me in everything I ever did. When I left university, that my mom was disappointed, but my dad knew that this was the thing to do, and so they formed me.
That was my conversation with Dan Aykroyd, actor, comedian, and cocktail aficionado. Also, I forgot to mention this, that little cameo you heard in there of someone on the phone. That was Johnny Fay, the drummer of the Tragically Hip. All right, that is it for the show today. You might have heard Leslie Feist and I talking a little bit earlier about how albums can turn into so much more. Well, tomorrow, me and the frontman for Jane's Addiction, Perry Farrell, talk about the same thing, how his new album turned into a whole thing in Las Vegas. My conversation with Perry Farrell tomorrow on Q. Later on.
PRI, Public Radio International.
You're listening to WUSF 89.7 News, Jazz, and NPR in Tampa Bay. I'm Dominic Walker, and it's about time here on WUSF to make our nightly transition from your regular daily news programming to All Night Jazz. That is where we play jazz for you every night from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. And tonight on All Night Jazz, we'll be continuing our week-long tribute to Lee Morgan, born this week in jazz, who would be turning 81 years old this week. So you'll hear a little bit of Lee every hour, every night. We'll also have our Jazz Trip at 10, where we're going into the breeze, and we'll celebrate the life of guitarist and singer and songwriter João Gilberto, who died this week at the age of 88. And that's all coming to you on All Night Jazz on WUSF 89.7 Tampa, St. Petersburg, Sarasota. We're broadcasting from the University of South Florida, and we'll get things started on All Night Jazz with a brand new album from Abishai Cohen right after this news update.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Louise Schiavone. Millionaire financier Jeffrey Epstein faces charges of sex trafficking and conspiracy in New York. Prosecutors say that this weekend, following Epstein's arrest, they found a trove of nude photographs of what appeared to be underage girls while executing a search warrant at his Manhattan mansion. Jeff Berman, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, spoke to reporters.
Combating sex trafficking and exploitation of children is a priority for this office and for the Department of Justice, as the sexual abuse of a minor can have devastating effects on victims, often lasting for years.
Epstein is being held in a federal lockup. Forecasters say the federal government may run out of money to pay its bills in early September unless Congress acts to raise the debt limit before that. NPR's Scott Horsley reports that is an earlier deadline than lawmakers were expecting.
Lawmakers thought they had until at least early October to cut a deal to raise the debt ceiling, but forecasters from the Bipartisan Policy Center now say crunch time could come sooner, as early as the first half of September. That ups the pressure on Congress, which is scheduled to be in recess for most of the month of August. It's possible the federal government could still limp along till October, but money is flowing out of the Treasury faster than tax revenues are coming in. Corporate tax revenues in particular are falling short of expectations. Corporate taxes through the first 8 months of the fiscal year were down nearly 9% from the previous year, after lawmakers slashed the corporate tax rate. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
President Trump says he plans to hold another expanded 4th of July celebration next year. NPR's Claudia Grisales reports that the comments came the same day that Democratic lawmakers called for a federal probe into the event.
President Donald Trump called his Salute to America a tremendous success and said it will happen again next year. On Thursday, Trump gave an address from the Lincoln Memorial with military flyovers and tanks on display. Today, Democrats on the Senate Appropriations Committee called for the Government Accountability Office to probe how much that event will cost taxpayers. Democratic Senators Tom Udall of New Mexico, Patrick Leahy of Vermont, and Chris Van Hollen of Maryland want the GAO to investigate whether Trump's event complied with restrictions on taxpayer-funded political activity. A video produced from the event was later shared by the White House and the Trump campaign. Claudia Grisales, NPR News, Washington.
Longshot Democratic presidential hopeful Eric Swalwell is bowing out of his party's crowded primary contest. The 38-year-old congressman from California says he will return to the House and then run for re-election. On Wall Street at the close, the Dow fell 115 points. The NASDAQ dropped 63 points. This is NPR News in Washington. A study published in the journal Nature Plants shows that plants genetically engineered to churn out useful enzymes grow well under field conditions, which is important for large-scale production. As Christine Herman from member station WILL reports, the method could help lower the cost of making vaccines and proteins for medical and industrial applications.
Scientists from the University of Illinois and Cornell in New York genetically modified tobacco plants to produce the bacterial enzyme cellulase, which is used to make biofuels. Co-lead author Justin McGrath says the plant's ability to grow in fields in Illinois is not affected by the genetic tweaking, and by modifying the DNA in the chloroplast instead of the nucleus, they make sure the foreign genes can't get out into nature.
There are no chloroplasts in pollen, and so even if they were to flower, that pollen wouldn't let the genes out into other plants out in the wild.
Next steps include isolating the cellulase from the plant's leaves and extending this method to try to create other valuable enzymes. For NPR News, I'm Christine Herman.
The U.S. women's national team is home after their World Cup championship win in France. Next big thing, a ticker tape parade in Manhattan on Wednesday. Midfielder Rose Lavelle scored the team's second goal in the final.
I think it's going to be unreal. I've seen it happen before, obviously, with the 2015 team, and I think to be a part of it now is going to be something really special.
Okay, hold on.
At Wimbledon today, Simona Halep has ended Coco Gauff's thrilling run at Wimbledon. I'm Louise Schiavone, NPR News, Washington.
Support for NPR comes from Americans for the Arts, committed to transforming America's communities through the arts and arts education, supporting the nonprofit arts industry, which employs 4.6 million people nationwide. Learn more at americansforthearts.org.
You're listening to WUSF 89.7 News, Jazz, and NPR in Tampa Bay. I'm Dominic Walker, and it's All Night Jazz for a Monday night now. I'm your Monday Night Jazz host, here with you right at the beginning of your week with all you jazz heads. And I love being here with you at the beginning of your week because, if you had a wonderful Monday, a wonderful start to your week, then we here at All Night Jazz, we're here to help you celebrate with some great music all night long. And if your Monday was lousy, then we here at All Night Jazz, we're here to help you relax and unwind with some great music all night long. And tonight we'll go back to 1963. In this hour, we'll go back to 1963 with Sonny Rollins and his album All the Things You Are. We'll hear a recording made on this day in jazz in 1957 featuring our focus artist of the week, Lee Morgan. That'll be from the Dizzy Gillespie Big Band. And we've got a couple June 2019 releases this hour. We'll hear from pianist George Cables and his album I'm All Smiles.
Still working on it.
We're going to start
Still
off
working
jazz
on
tonight with bassist Avishai Cohen and his brand new album Arvoles. Again, that just came out last month. All the music on the album written by Avishai. Here is one entitled Wings, right here on All Night Jazz for a Monday night. I'm Dominic Walker. This is WUSF 89.7.
Nope, that did not go at all the way I planned. Damn it. Seems like I'm losing more and more. Okay. Toolbox is what I need. There we go. Go ahead and you... Come on now. There we go. Right up there. Ah, man. Sometimes you are a pain in the butt. Just so you know. Let's do this again. I'll have to deal with this later. I wonder what else disappeared on me. Time slider? I don't need that. Alright. So, where were we? We were here. Did I? Come on, really?
When the day fades and the sadness returns, when you dream of the years that are gone, look deeper in your heart. Look deep in your heart. Deeper in your heart.
Alright, we get to see now how good or bad this theory was. We still have an issue. Oh, there's a triangle here that I still need to resolve. Wow. Yeah, some of this is just a mess. That, I believe, may have just solved my little problem. Possibly. See how many moves away this is. Apparently not. That still doesn't... Wait. I don't think this at all... Yeah, no, that did not... That's horrible. So no, that did not remotely solve my problem.
That's a recording made on this day in jazz in 1957 from the Dizzy Gillespie Big Band right here on All Night Jazz. You just heard I Remember Clifford. That's a Benny Golson tune. And playing trumpet on that track, you heard our focus artist of the week, Lee Morgan, playing on I Remember Clifford, recorded on this day in jazz. Just prior to that, vocalist Judy Wexler and her album Dreams and Shadows. She was singing the title track, Dreams and Shadows, and we started off All Night Jazz tonight with a brand new album from bassist Avishai Cohen. The album just came out last month. It's called Arvoles, and you heard an Avishai original that was Wings. I'm Dominic Walker, and you're listening to All Night Jazz on WUSF 89.7 News, Jazz, and NPR in Tampa Bay. Don't miss your chance to join us this fall for the trip of a lifetime to Spain. You'll tour through Madrid and Barcelona, revel in the glories of Spain's landscapes, and get to know the art, food, and culture on this 10-day trip. You've got just a few spots left, so visit wusf.org/Spain for more information. Continuing with the music, we're going to start off this next set with saxophonist Joe Lovano. And this is from his album Joyous Encounter, where we'll hear Hank Jones on the piano, George Mraz on bass, and Paul Motion on the drums. After that, we'll hear from Count Basie and Billy Eckstein, born on this day in jazz, and we'll end the set with organist Caesar Frazier. But first, Joe Lovano. Here is the music of Thelonious Monk. This is Panonica, right here on All Night Jazz.
Thank you.
I think I'm fairly happy with this right now. It only took friggin' how long was I working on this tonight? Decent amount of time. But we finally got the edge flow working for me in a way that kind of bugs me though. That definitely bugs me. I definitely want better edge flow there, if I can manage it. I wonder what happens if I add an edge loop here. Nothing really to speak of to improve the quality. Alright, not quite done yet. Not quite done yet. Nope, not quite. Hold on. Never can. Whenever you think you solve something, you create 30 more problems.
So lonesome, and Daddy wants his baby home. It's a downright rotten, low down, dirty shame. It's a downright treating poor me. I know I'm not to blame. Jelly, 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 jelly stays on my mind. Jelly, 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 jelly stays on my mind. Jelly roll kill my pappy. It run my mommy stone blind.
Yeah, let's see how weird this can get. I am willing to bet that it can get pretty damn weird. Let's see. Too weird. Ah, man. Don't really want to go that route. Man, this is like chess. Like an annoying chess.
Caesar Frazier playing the organ for you here on All Night Jazz from his latest release, Closer to the Truth, that came out in February of this year, where Caesar's leading a quartet of Lyle Link on the tenor saxophone, Jacques Lejour on the guitar, and Leon Joyce Jr. on the drums. You just heard Jive Samba. That's a tune written by Matt Avonlea. You heard it here from Caesar Frazier.
A little bit ugly there.
Count Basie and Billy Eckstine, who was born on this day in jazz. Just prior to that, the tune was Jelly Jelly from Count Basie and Billy Eckstine. And we started off the set with saxophonist Joe Lovano, joined by pianist Hank Jones, bassist George Mraz, and Paul Motion on the drums. From the album Joyous Encounter, they were playing the music of Thelonious Monk. You heard Pananica from Joe Lovano. I'm Dominic Walker. You're listening to All Night Jazz on WUSF 89.7, News, Jazz, and NPR in Tampa Bay. We've got just one set left for you for the 9 o'clock hour on All Night Jazz. And that said, we're going to hear from vocalist and saxophonist Curtis Stigers, the album Real Emotional. He'll be singing the music of Mose Allison. We've got Sonny Rollins playing the music of George Gershwin. And recording
actually
from 1963.
Seems like it
We're
could
going to
work.
start off the set with a June 2019 release. We've got pianist George Cables here leading a trio of Esiet on the bass and Victor Lewis on the drums. This is from an album called I'm All Smiles. George Cables here with Love
You
is
know
a
what?
Men's
I will go ahead and
Thing
call it
right
and
here
say
on All
that
Night Jazz.
is the edge flow that I'm looking for. That little spear-shaped quad there is fine. This is also fine, I think. I can go in and actually clean up the geometry a little bit, which I will do now. I finally have all of it in quads, so it's perfectly fine. Oh, delete that. Don't need that there. Yay. Alright, so let me get my arm reference here. We're using the multi-cut tool to cut multiple here. Lovely. And that slices it multiple places, which is great. It's exactly what we need. You know what? I'll go ahead and do the other cuts. I was thinking about using the edge offset tool, but I don't really need it. Not in this instance anyway. So now that I have these, I can select alright, so that's finger one. I'm going to select the first two fingers. Alright. I can scoot them back a little bit here. Actually, let me kind of skew the whole hand back here. let me do this instead. Alright. So that kind of arcs the fingers, at least the palm area. But, let's see. Like this way there isn't too much distortion. There will be some. But I can select the fingers here and rotate them back. Actually, let me do it this way.
Sitting there yakking right in my face. Gonna have to put you in your place. You know if silence was golden, you couldn't raise a dime. Because your mind is on vacation and your mouth is working overtime.
Alright. Look at this, buddy.
You're quoting figures and dropping names. You're telling stories about.
Alright. I like that. It's not, maybe not the best, maybe not the most ideal or elegant solution, but you know what? It'll do.
You lead life of crime because your mind is on vacation and your mouth is working overtime.
Alright, now I'm going to duplicate this. Weird. I'm going to save this. Let's save it as 11. Hit the bridge. That could definitely work differently.
Just grin and bear it. All I can say is if the shoe fits, wear it. And if you must keep talking, please try.
Alright, let's try that again.
Because your mind is on vacation and your mouth is working overtime.
Curtis Stigers singing and playing the saxophone for you here on All Night Jazz. Finishing off the 9 o'clock hour with a tune written by Mose Allison. You heard Your Mind is on Vacation. That's from Curtis Stigers and his album Real Emotional. You heard from tenor saxophonist Sonny Rollins just prior to that, and a recording from 1963 where he was playing the music of George Gershwin. You heard Summertime with Coleman Hawkins joining on the saxophone as well, Paul Bley on the piano, Henry Grimes on bass, and Roy McCurdy on the drums. And we started off that final set of the 9 o'clock hour with pianist George Cables and his album I'm All Smiles that just came out last month with Esliet on the bass and Victor Lewis on the drums.
All right.
You heard Love is a Many Splendored Thing from George Cables to start off the set of the first hour on All Night Jazz tonight. I'm Dominic Walker, and this is WUSF 89.7 Tampa, St. Petersburg. We're broadcasting from the University of South Florida We've got a whole night of jazz ahead of us and our Jazz Trip at 10 coming up right after this news update. We'll be right back.
Alright, I may actually rejoin this a little later. I might want to spend a little more time on the upper portion of the hand and the thumb before I connect it to the rest of the body, but I'll save this out like this for now. We are very close to the portion of the project where I lay out the UVs and then start sculpting it. I'm liking the way it's coming out so far. So, cool.
Much of the financial information.
Thank you very much for watching. My name is Charles Fernandez. This has been the Artstation Challenge Merlin project. And I will see you tomorrow. May the force be